Hi everybody. In this video I'm going to demonstrate how to make an app that is kind of one of those name generator quizzes on the internet. It's a sci-fi name generator. This will give you an opportunity to practice using text input boxes as well as some different blocks for working with strings and manipulating strings in App Inventor. So let me just show you how it's supposed to work. You will enter some different pieces of information, such as your first name, last name, where you were born, and a parent or guardian's name. And when you run it, it should give you a funny looking combination of letters by combining all those things together. Raiti Sakwar. I don't know if that's really my sci-fi name. Let's say, what about somebody named John Smith from Boston? His dad could still be named Steve. I think Jote Bosme actually sounds kind of sci-fi-esque. So sometimes it works, sometimes it works and so better than other times. But the whole idea is just to practice using some string manipulation blocks to give different combinations of those letters. So let me show you how to build this app. So the user interface is pretty simple. There's just a text box for each type of input you want. I'm going to use first name, last name, city or town of birth, and parent or guardian name as the inputs, but you could use different pieces of information if you wanted to. But I'll show you the basic way to set up the user interface, and you can use the same ideas. You can always copy this as well. So first of all, you're going to need some place to put all of those boxes. You'll notice that, well, I guess let me just grab the components first. First of all, you'll notice that if you just grab labels, it needed 4 labels to start with and 4 text boxes. But you'll notice if I try to line up the text boxes, like, it doesn't really give me that neat grid that I had before. You could, I suppose, stagger them like this. There's kind of nothing wrong with that, but no reason not to get used to how to use layout blocks, or layout components rather. Layout components just allow you to rearrange the components on the screen. So you can arrange them horizontally, you can arrange them in a table, or you can arrange them vertically. In this case, horizontal would, you could arrange them horizontally side by side, but then you'd have to do 4 of those. I'm just going to do a table arrangement. And then what we can do is set the number of rows and columns. So I want 2 columns. I want 4 rows. What that'll let me do is set it up so that each label is side by side with its text box. And so the labels are just indicating what to put in the text box, and the text box is where the user will put the input. And then later what you can do is get that input and pass that input to some sort of procedure, and that procedure will generate the sci-fi name. So I'm going to update all my labels, all my label names. So I'll say label 1, I'll say label first for first name, label 2, label last, label 3, label city, town, label 4. Parent or guardian name. And then text boxes, same thing. So all the components are named. The labels don't actually have any different text. You see that when you name the components, what you're doing is you're naming how they appear over here. These names. But to set the text property, you have to go over here in the properties window. And I'll say first name for the first name spot. Last name. City, town of birth. Parent, guardian name. And then we'll need a couple more things here. We'll need a button to tell it when to go. I'm just going to leave this as button 1 because it's the only one. It's pretty easy to tell. I'll just say go. You could say generate name. You could say whatever you want, as long as it's sort of clear that you click the button to do the thing. And then you need a label at the bottom. I'm just going to, for now, just say your sci-fi name. And I'll rename that. Label sci-fi. Okay, so these are all my components. I've got this table arrangement. It has all the inputs where the user will type the inputs. User clicks go, it generates the name and prints it down here. So now I need to set up some blocks. And first I'll show you kind of the simplest way to do it. It won't actually work every time, but it'll give you a way to test and make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do, kind of. And then I'll show you a way to make sure it works every time and works with sort of any kind of input that you give it. So just to make it work in the first place, it's just when the button is clicked, it needs to combine together a bunch of text and put it on that label. So when the button is clicked, I'm going to set the sci-fi label, so label sci-fi.text, the text property, to a bunch of text joined together. So you've seen this block before, join. It's going to have to join together a few different things. One, you'll see that there are a bunch of different ways you can manipulate strings. So remember, strings are just text. These, all these pink blocks have to do with text. And there are a lot of different things that App Inventor can do with text. It can see the length of a particular string. It can see if there's anything even there, if there's nothing there at all, because you can actually have an empty string like this is empty. You can do comparisons. You can do things with case. And you can do a whole bunch of different types of like splitting and rearranging. I'm not going to go through all of them because this is kind of where I want to focus, is the splitting and rearranging. That's what we need to do. We need to take just a small piece of it, use that, and not use the whole thing. In particular, this one's going to be really useful. A lot of these work the same way, where you give it two or three inputs. You give it the text you want to work with as the input, where, oh, I grabbed the wrong one. You give it the text that you want to work with as the input, and then you give it some other input to sort of tell it how to do its operation. So in this case, we're going to find a segment from a piece of text starting at a particular number in the order. See it, if you hover over, I'm going to hover my mouse over it, and it says extract the segment of the given length. So you're going to tell it how long you want the segment to be from the given text, starting from the given text, starting from the given position. So basically, like, you tell it where to start, and you tell it where how long it should be, and it's going to take that slice of the text. So like, I grab one of these. If I know I want to use whatever was typed into an input box, a text input in those text boxes, that's the text I'm going to use. So I want to join label. I'll start with first name, text box first name, right? This is where the user typed in their first name. That text property. So that's the text I'm working with. I just want to start at the first letter. And then I want the length to be reasonable enough where kind of you type any name, it's going to work. This is where we run into issues, right? How long is a name? Well, I suppose most names aren't shorter than like 3 letters. Let's just say 3 and kind of hope for the best. And then I'm just going to add a few more things because I know I need a chunk from like 2 pieces of input to make up the first name, 2 pieces of input to make up the last name, and then an extra one just for a space. So I'll put a space in between them with an empty string, and I'm actually going to hit the space bar. The space is a character. So what I'll have is a chunk for the first name, a chunk to add on to the first name. Might as well do that right now. So this is the part of the first name. Then I'll use we'll use the parent's first name, because if you're typing it in like a parent's first name, we'll take the end of the parent's first name. So you got like the beginning of your own first name, and then the end of a parent first name. And let's try to split that from like, I don't know, let's go with like the 3rd letter, make it length of 2. Again, it's kind of hard to find inputs here that are going to work with absolutely everything and actually make sense. So I'll show you how to expand this and make it a little bit possibly better in a minute. But really, you can just keep duplicating, and let's go last name, start at the first letter, length of 3 should be fine, and then city or town of birth. And actually, I think I'll change the order here. Let's like do, instead of the beginning of your first name, because it was the beginning of your beginning of your last name, because we did the beginning of your real first name, let's go the end of your first name. So I'll do city or town of birth, start at 1, length of 3, and let's do a chunk of your last name and length of 2. So you just it's going to keep grabbing segments of strings, a length of 3, so 3 letters from the beginning of your first name, 2 letters from the end or middle-ish or somewhere from the starting at the 3rd letter of your parent's name, a space, and then the last name will be made up of the city or town where you were born, combined with some letters from your last name. And that should just work. So let me bring back my emulator screen here. See how it works. I think this is slightly different than the example I did before. Let me refresh it too. And that looks like it works. Ryev Swar. Saura. Raya of Saura. It's not bad. Um, so, okay, that worked. It did. But one problem is, what if you end up with like really, if you end up with different inputs? What if you have like maybe a really short first and last name? Like, I don't know. Joe, J-O. Joe Doe. From place parent guardian name of Jim. I ended up with an error. So one of the things it was trying to do, one of the things it was trying to do was get a piece of text of a certain length, and it just couldn't do it because the text wasn't long enough. So you ran into a problem like that because we're hard coding numbers. And the problem with hard coding numbers, and this is kind of constant throughout a lot of things in programming, the problem with hard coding numbers is that if the number that you need sort of changes, if just the needs of your program change, the program isn't flexible. So a lot of times it's better to use math to make it flexible. So here's what you can do to use math to make it flexible. Instead of hard-coded numbers, just set up a formula to figure out just what is going to be, instead of a fixed length, half. We'll just go with half of whatever the input is. So what you can do is we have that length block, so we can figure out the length of the string. We can figure out the length of that text. Just give it the text. So we've got text box first, dot text, figure out how long it is. Let's divide it by 2. Now we will run into an issue with odd numbers because that would produce a decimal. So what we can also add is a floor block, which will just round it down. So it just rounds everything down. If it's 3 letters, it's going to be 1.5 because let's say you had a 3-letter word, that length of 3 plugged into this block, 3 divided by 2, it's going to be 1.5. Floor means it's going to round down to 1. It's always just going to round down. So what we can do, start at letter 1 and include up to about half of the letters. And then for this one, we can actually start halfway. I'll just duplicate that and change which text box it is. I'll go text box parent. And this will actually be halfway. We'll start at the halfway point. And we'll use a length of half the letters. So if you start at halfway and you use a length of halfway, we're using the other half. So what we end up doing is using the first half of one and the second half of the other. So you just keep splitting stuff in half. And you can just do that on the other side. So start at the beginning. Just gonna change this, which text box it is, to city, town. And then same thing here. Start halfway. Halfway through, this one is gonna be last name. And the length will be half of the last name. So it'll just be the second half of the last name. So if I didn't make any mistakes, this should be able to work with any input. Let me refresh. So let me try typing my fictional name that broke it last time. And it isn't great, but it produced an output, that's the important thing, is that it takes any input and it produces an output now. Also, if you have something much longer, like you end up getting a longer output. You don't get the same length of output every time. So having something flexible like this does have its advantages. It allows to at least get an output when you have unusually small inputs, and it allows you to also adjust to longer inputs and not just have the same thing every time. So that's all for this app. I'll see you next time.